Hello, Sunshine. I'm Alexi Lalas, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This week, we'll be talking Americans on the move and AFCON and City and Sargent and North London, Derby, whatever, North by Northwest, McKennie, Fonzie, Streetcar Named Desire, Rusnak, Medicine, and much more. But first, joining me, as always, my friend, my colleague, my guiding light, David Mosse, a soccer savant and a Fox soccer researcher and writer extraordinaire. How are you today, Mosse, on this? What are we looking at? Monday, January 17th, and we are in the offices, in the Fox studios recording this one. Now, no more remote. Well, there'll be more remote, but at least not this week.
Yeah, good to be back. We kicked Skip Bayless out.
That's what we do.
It's very competitive.
There's a hierarchy
here
for, and he learned his lesson. We sent him packing, and we're back here. How was your week, my friend? Did you see anything interesting?
Yeah, a couple of things for me. I actually got back into the soccer documentary game.
Ooh.
I watched on Amazon Prime the Juventus one, which was very interesting because you had Cristiano Ronaldo and Weston McKennie as prime characters in it. And then I also watched the Bayern Munich one, Behind the Legend, which was fascinating. Our good friend Thomas Hauptmann got a cameo in it.
Really?
Yeah, and just going behind the scenes with that juggernaut of a club and seeing how they operate. I watched the PSG one as well. So, I read a column recently, I think it was on World Soccer Talk, talking about how there were maybe too many of these soccer documentaries. The market was becoming oversaturated. And I think there's some truth to that. For a while, I felt like I needed to get away from them, but this week I dipped back into it. I also watched a couple movies. I went to the theater. I saw Licorice Pizza.
Ooh, any good?
I liked it. Yeah, very good. Oh, big thumbs up from movie expert Luis Aguilar.
Okay, all right. So that's 2 thumbs up. I haven't seen it.
And then last night on Netflix, I watched this, The Power of the Dog, which is the Oscar favorite. Probably is going to end up winning the Oscar Best Picture. Yeah, I liked it.
Better than the Licorice movie?
Yeah, totally different. More artsy-fartsy. Licorice Pizza is more fun, but yeah, I mean, I can.
Artsy always wins over fun.
Yeah, I can respect the craftsmanship in The Power of the Dog. I thought it was an incredibly well-made film.
All right, that's cool. All right, so what do I have this week? I had a real retro week. I went back and watched not just, I know 80s is my wheelhouse and stuff like that, but I went even further back and watched a couple of movies that I may have seen in the past. Well, I know I haven't seen one of them, but first one I watched was North by Northwest with Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint, and it's wonderful. It has the the famous scene with the crop duster and the airplane and all that kind of stuff. But it holds up. Obviously, it's set in a very different time in America, but it's fun to see all the different sets. Alfred Hitchcock, by the way, and that definitely holds up as one of those movies that you always hear about, but I hadn't remembered seeing. And I don't think that I saw it. Another one along those lines is A Streetcar Named Desire. I never saw A Streetcar Named Desire, never read the book, never saw the play, and never saw the film, which basically broke Marlon Brando, and Vivian Leigh was in it. It was good. You can tell it's based off of a play, and therefore it kind of looks like just a play on screen, which is, I guess, the intent. And the acting part of it is what you're supposed to look at, but I didn't like it as much as I wanted to or thought I was going to like it. I'm not, saying that the acting wasn't good, but I like North by Northwest in terms of my retro ones there. And then I guess this is retro. Night Shift, a movie that came out in the 80s, starring Shelley Long and Henry Winkler and the great Michael Keaton. It's just a great comedy, and it does hold up. It probably would never be made today. As a matter of fact, I don't think it would be made today. But it holds up. It shows a gritty part of New York. And to see Henry Winkler, who at that time was a comedic actor and the Fonz and everything, play kind of the straight man and in a very, very different character, it was great. And I think it just had its 40th anniversary or something like that. So that's one. And then from a current perspective, Vigil, which is an episodic type of thing, about a Scottish submarine where a murder happens. And so it's a murder drama, but it all takes place, most of it takes place on a submarine. I recommend it highly. Again, these stories that incorporate 6 and 8 types of episodes, sometimes they become bloated. And I think that's the case here in that it could have been shorter, but it wasn't. But still, it was a good one called Vigil, not Virgil, Vigil. Scottish submarine flick. So those are a couple of suggestions out there.
On the TV show front, I'm hearing incredible things about this HBO Max program, Station 11. Have
Oh,
you
really?
watched any of this?
No, I haven't.
My father highly recommended it. Andy Greenwald and Chris Ryan on the Watch podcast, which I listen to every week, have been effusive in their praise for that show. And I don't know if you saw on Twitter yesterday, some guy sent us this list of the 35 greatest HBO shows
I saw
ever.
that, yes.
And this show, Station 11, which just came out, is already on that list. So people are already speaking of it in those terms. So I know I've got Ozark coming up soon, so I'm excited about that. But I'm also going to have to make sure I watch this Station 11.
A couple of things before we jump into it. One, there was a request on the Twitter machine over there from someone who listens to our show, and sometimes you forget how people listen to it. He listens to it, I think it was a he, when he's driving. And therefore, when we're giving out our suggestions and when we're talking about the things that we watch, he can't jot it down or anything like that. And so he has requested that we include it in the notes. And I was talking to Luis, we're going to find a way to at least have those accessible without having to actually listen to the pod so that you can figure it out and take our suggestions or not. As you know, my mom, your word is gospel when it comes to TV shows. So there's a lot of people out there. I had a lot of people this week talking about how awesome you are. I'm not going to tell you about them, but there's a lot of people out there that really somehow find you incredible.
Can I circle back to the
Sure.
Bayern Munich documentary for 1 second?
Okay.
When I put it on Amazon Prime, initially it was dubbed, and it took me a few minutes to figure out how to change it for it to be in German but subtitled.
To work your remote
Yes.
control. Got it.
And it harkens back to this debate that erupted in the Fox control room a few weeks ago. I was talking to our graphics person, Ashley Barmacy, who you know very well, about Squid Game. And I watched it with them speaking in Korean and subtitles. And she's one of those people that likes to look down at her phone during shows, so she doesn't want to have to stare at the screen the whole time. So she prefers these foreign shows dubbed. And I'm sorry, but I think she's ridiculous with that, because even watching this Bayern Munich show for a couple minutes, hearing Hansi Flick give like a post-game speech to the players and him sound like, great job, fellas, heck of an effort out there. I mean, it just sounds ridiculous. It's so inauthentic. It takes me out of it. Where are you on this whole dubbing versus subtitle?
I think it is a skill and an art that many have not mastered. And I think sometimes it's just slapped together at different times. And look, you know, all the crime dramas that I watch, especially the Scandinavian ones, you have that possibility. And I started out doing just the subtitles. And so hearing it in the natural language, but I have since changed, not because it's necessarily gotten better, but I'm now more used to the dubbing, and maybe my bar is set so low that I just kind of grin and bear it. So I'm actually with Ashley, and I like to be on my phone and doing multiple things when I'm doing something like this.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. I should remind you off the top about our State of the Union podcast hotline. We have gotten lots of calls over the last year that we have done it, but we want more. We want more of those calls, and I want to remind you: 657-549-2297, 657-549-2297. That's the number that you can call and leave a message, and you can go for as long as you want. We try, hopefully you're efficient in the way that you do it. We don't want you babbling on, but we do want calls, and we want more calls to come in, because I think it's a really interesting way to not just get your point across, but also to get your personality across. So again, the State of the Union podcast hotline, 657-549-2297. All right, Mosse, you ready to light this candle?
Let's do it.
Yes, it's time for my State of the Union, where I look at a part of the game from an American perspective. And this week, it goes a little something like this. It's 2022, and we find ourselves potentially entering a golden age of American soccer talent, or at least a brave new world. A time when our abundant young talent is consistently being identified, developed, and marketed to the world. And guess what? The world is buying. Pulisic, McKennie, Adams, Pepe, Busio, Aronson, Dike, Tessman, McKenzie, Stefan, the list goes on, and it only seems to grow bigger every transfer window. Now, it's not that we haven't produced great American talent in the past, but not with this size, scope, and regularity. And it's all happening at a time when pathways and opportunities are much greater than before. Everything from more established connections between clubs to American ownership to even COVID business realities have made American players much more attractive and palatable than in the past. In creating this new world, we've given a generation a safe, supportive, and comfortable environment to develop. It's a bubble, a cocoon where everything is provided, often from an early age. High-quality coaching, fields, equipment, medicine, competition, technology, all in the pursuit of better players. Now, I'm not saying they're spoiled, but there is now a generation of American players who, from a very young age, have only known the comfort of that bubble. This is good. This is progress. This is something to take pride in, and I do. But to whom much is given, much is expected. You can't teach heart, desire, or effort. Not all these fortunate players will succeed. But if they don't, it won't be because they weren't given every advantage, privilege, and opportunity to succeed. All right, Mosse, so there is my State of the Union for this week. And it's something that we've touched upon for years now, but certainly it has gained speed given the amount, like I said, in the State of the Union, the amount of players that we have. And it seems every single week there is some sort of goings on when it comes to a player. Whether we're in the windows or not, there is still movement. There was movement this week when it comes to Major League Soccer. But it's even movement now, even within Major League Soccer, is oftentimes framed in opportunities or pathways or desires and hopes and dreams from players to make that move over to Europe into quote-unquote bigger and better environments now. So where do you want to start here?
Well, I think it segues nicely into this Kellyn Acosta story, which I find so fascinating because, as you mentioned in your State of the Union, it's never been easier for American players to go to Europe because European clubs are now very interested in American players, and MLS has bought into the notion of being a selling league. So, in theory, if you're an American player and you want to find your way to Europe, it should be fairly straightforward. And yet we have this Kellyn Acosta case, a player who burst on the scene with Dallas, had a couple of years there in the wilderness where his form dipped, but he's now reestablished himself with Colorado. And I know you bristle sometimes at this notion that a player has to go to Europe to advance their career, but in Kellyn Acosta's case, he clearly wants to do it. He's made no secret of the fact that he views that as the natural next step in his career, and yet somehow he has not been able to find his way there. And the big news involving him in the last few days is that he's been traded from Colorado to LAFC. And Colorado, on his way out the door said, hey, listen, we had to get rid of that contract, and there were no offers from Europe, so it had to be a move within MLS. And then Acosta fired back and said, no, that's not true. You had offers from Europe on the table and just chose not to accept them. So there's this whole back and forth now about whether Acosta really did have an opportunity to go to Europe or not. And, he has to balance that with also expressing excitement about joining LAFC. So it's a little bit of a tricky thing for him. But nevertheless, it's just interesting that here's a guy who's, starting games for the U.S. national team at this time where American players are so in vogue in Europe, and yet somehow has not ended up in Europe. He's getting older. That window is closing. I mean, what do you make of this whole situation? Do you understand his frustration?
I understand his frustration, but I have very little sympathy, I guess, for his plight. And that may sound harsh from the outside. First off, I'm interested to know, and we don't know yet, whether this is something that is being driven by Kellyn Acosta. Is this being driven? I mean, does he feel that his spot right now with the national team, which isn't in pen, it's not necessarily secure, but he had a hell of a year last year and played a tremendous amount of games and was involved in multiple tournaments and has been involved with Greg Berhalter's setup. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. But has he been made aware that if he doesn't move on and quote unquote take a step up, that is in jeopardy? Or does he just feel that for him to have had a successful career, he needs that? Regardless, again, and this is something that I mentioned in the State of the Union. This is a player that from a very early age has been given everything. And his career trajectory has been at times mapped out, but it's gone astray at different times. And that is going to happen. Having said that, the opportunities that he has been afforded are so much greater than so many players out there. And so that it didn't happen the way that you planned it or the way that you wanted it, whose fault is that? Now, if somebody lied to him and told him I was going to do this and now I'm going to do that, that's a different story. But teams, whether it's FC Dallas or Colorado or teams that he's been with, acting in their best interest to make their team better, that is absolutely what they've done. And this is what gets back to where it's starting to drive me a little crazy that we are starting to treat players with the same mindset and in the same fashion that we treated previous generations that were not given these opportunities. If from an early age you are in that cocoon, in that bubble, and you have been schooled on and off the field to be a professional athlete and to understand all of the machinations that exist out there. You can't have it both ways. You can't claim naivete, or you can't claim that you weren't aware, or that that you didn't have an idea of these possibilities. If from an early age you have been in that cocoon that is teaching you to be a professional, this kind of stuff happens. You don't always get the move that you want. You don't always get the move to where you want. You don't always get the move to the money that you want or the situation that you want. And you can scream and you can throw your, what do they say? Throw the things out of the baby toys or whatever that saying is. Anyway, you can whine and scream and yell, but ultimately teams are going to do what's best for them. And if somebody had come in and said, we're going to pay $20 million for Kellyn Acosta, the situation may be different. But until that happens, or something like that happens, this was what Robin Fraser and the powers that be in Colorado deemed was best for their club going forward. And I don't fault them for doing that and doing what is best. I don't know if ultimately Kellyn Acosta is going to realize that dream of going to Europe. I recognize in the moment he was not happy. He would not be the first, nor will he be the last to not be happy necessarily about a trade that happens. But guess what? You are still in the absolute minority and small, fortunate section of people that actually get to play professional athletics for still a lot of money relative to most people in the world. And that you have somebody that actually wants you and is willing to pay that type of money should say a lot of things. And you can see the change in terms of his first tweet, where he explained Colorado pushed me out and they had an offer for me and blah, blah, blah. Just because you have an offer and something on the table doesn't mean just because you want it that your club should take it and do that. And then his second tweet, which was obviously a reaction to the first tweet, maybe it was from his agent, maybe it was from somebody he trusts, or maybe he just thought better of it and said, well, this isn't going to be good if I go to LAFC having said that, because it looks like this is the last place in the world that I want to be. And
Colorado did send a midfielder to Europe in the last few days. Cole Bassett is off to Feyenoord on loan. We did the friendly against Bosnia-Herzegovina in December. He came on and scored the winner on his debut, a match Eric Winald attended. So in some sense, Colorado is part of this, league-wide thing of becoming a selling league. It's not like they haven't bought into it at all, but just in Acosta's case, they view that as
I don't think it's a personal thing. It's not a vendetta. It's like we refuse to sell Kellyn Acosta to any place around. By the way, if they felt that there was something appropriate, you don't necessarily, oftentimes we say, well, you don't sell a player or trade a player to one of your rivals. In essence, they're just making LAFC FC better by doing this within the league. So if they had an opportunity that made sense from a financial perspective overseas, they would have done that.
And they also sold Sam Vines last year. Yeah, I mean, it looks like they're going to build their midfield around Jack Price and Mark Anthony Kaye, who ironically enough, they acquired in a trade from LAFC 6 months ago. So the two teams combining again.
And how old is, let's see how old Kellyn Acosta is. I mean, this is a player that's 26 years old. It's different when you're a teenager, an 18-year-old player. And if you're going to say, well, why wasn't I sold if this player was sold? Hello, welcome to the world. All right, welcome to the market. And your age and your youth does factor into if you go, where you go, and for how much you go. And so, yeah, like I said, I have little sympathy for Kellyn Acosta. I love him as a player. I want him on the national team. And I think whether he's playing at Colorado, whether he's playing at LAFC, or whether he's playing over in Europe, he is going to be part of the plans for Greg Berhalter. And I don't think the move changes it. And you know what? You might not get everything that you dreamt of. Welcome to life. You don't always get all of your dreams don't always come true, or all of your dreams don't always come true. But when it comes to dreams and opportunities, you are, again, as I said, in rarefied air relative to a lot of other people. And maybe this generation, and again, I tried not to be grumpy old man in the State of the Union, Mosse, but there was a tinge of grumpy old man there. Maybe this generation also needs to recognize that just because they have been handed everything doesn't mean that it's always going to be there.
At least there was no tattooed millionaire.
No. I've moved on from that.
But yeah, Acosta will now be playing for Steve Trunlo, who we interviewed on last week's pod. People can go back and listen to that interview. It's still up. Acosta's former former team, FC Dallas, the one he first came up with, they have no problem sending players to Europe. It's what they do. So another one, Justin Che, looks like is headed to Hoffenheim. Remember, he already trained with Bayern Munich as part of that partnership, came back to MLS, and now is heading back to Germany to play alongside Chris Richards, another FC Dallas Academy product who went to Europe. So yeah, to your point about your State of the Union, we're seeing every day now more and more young Americans.
And it's great. And people ask me this all the time. Is it, and I mentioned it briefly in the State of the Union, is it a situation where we just have so much great talent finally? And again, I think it bears repeating. It's not that we haven't had great players in the past, but, again, I had to play in a World Cup to go to Europe. That shouldn't be the case. And I'm glad that it's not. And all of these different players getting these different opportunities is wonderful. As it relates to MLS, yeah, now you're part of the global marketplace. And it was a mandate. It was something that you were very public about stating that you wanted to be a part of. Well, now you are. What you have to be careful right now is the risk of being pigeonholed and painted as that feeder league, that minor league team, that is all that you ultimately do. And that's why I mentioned last week the signing at FC Dallas of Jesus Ferreira is a good sign, even, and the continued signings, Insigne and the different players over there.
One massive move within MLS, Albert Rusnak goes to Seattle. It's now official. So Keith Costigan eventually got the story right. He's off to Seattle as a designated player. Evidently, João Paulo can now be bought down to not be a DP, so that opened up that slot. But I tell you, this Seattle team on paper next season, you've got
Rich get richer.
Rui Diaz, Jordan Morris, Ladera. Let's say Ladera and Morris are completely healthy and back to their best. João Paulo, Christian Roldan, and Albert Rusnak. We saw Schmetzer last year play a lot of this back three with two wingbacks, two central midfielders, a 10, and then two forwards. Be interesting to see this season what the formation would be there, but nevertheless, I mean, the 6 players I just rattled off.
And, like I said, the rich get richer, and Garth Lagerwey, who has steered that club, by the way, another asset that was pried away from RSL. I mean, Seattle just keeps raiding RSL, and RSL, as I said last week, just kind of lets them do that. I had mentioned this before, and I will stick with this. And hopefully it's a long time, but when Don Garber, the commissioner of MLS, does decide to step down and they start looking for replacements, Garth Lagerwey, for me, because of not just his success at Seattle, but I think his understanding of the way the league works, the way the league functions within the world, there's going to be a lot of different people that are put up for that job, and rightfully so, because I think it's a plum type of job. But for lack of a better phrase, the soccer people out there, I think he would be one that they would definitely or should definitely look at, which means they're definitely not going to look at.
Bob Bradley's Toronto FC continuing to make moves. It looks like this is going to be, and by the way, I should be couching all these moves because some of them I'm mentioning aren't official yet. But
if we say it here on the State of the Union podcast, they are official.
But it looks like this might be a swap where Toronto FC would send Soteldo to Tigres in exchange for defender Carlos Salcedo, who's played in MLS before with RSL. Yep. Soteldo became surplus to requirements with Insigne coming in. São Paulo in Brazil have been trying to get Soteldo. He has a great reputation there because a couple of years ago he helped Santos get to a Libertadores final, but it looks like he's off to Mexico. Salcedo going the other way. Toronto, one of the busier teams in this.
They are, and this is great. And this is, first off, you go get Bob Bradley, and that has changed the way that we looked at it. Now you're making moves. They got to figure out what they're going to do with Josie Altidore. That's easier said than done. But I think that when all is said and done, the expectations for a team like Toronto are going to be the highest, and rightfully so. And we've seen in this league that you can go from very bad to very good very, very quickly. And that's what Bob Bradley is hoping to do. So I'm excited for what Toronto FC looks like in 2022. Someone was asking me the other day, and I'll ask you this question, of the new coaches out there. And, you're talking a bunch of them out there, including, like I said, Bob Bradley, including Pat Noonan, Steve Cherundolo, all of these coaches. Who ultimately you think has the best season when all is said and done? Bob?
It's a boring answer, but
It is.
yeah, I mean,
What if he doesn't, though?
then you have to ask some questions.
Do you have to ask some questions, or
Well,
is this a work in progress?
The way it ended with LAFC, we all sort of thought, well, it just ran its course there, but he just needs a change of scenery, and now he's going to another big spending club, and he'll have success there too. If he were to struggle with Toronto, then maybe he's kind of losing it a little.
Well, considering the I guess the redemption or the resurrection, if you will, of Bruce Arena and what that was, they're friends, they've worked together in the past. They're very different types of individuals, but there is that competition that goes on. And, the talk of what Bruce Arena is relative to Bob Bradley, the talk of what Bruce Arena relative to Ziggy Schmidt and all of these Mount Rushmore types of MLS coaches and U.S. coaches out there. I think that Bob Bradley will be doing everything in his power to make sure that 2022 is viewed as a success.
It's funny, we mentioned Salcedo. One note on Mexico here, which sort of ties into your State of the Union.
Mm-hmm.
We're off and running again. Liga MX, the Clausura is underway. Remember when we last left off, Atlas won the Apertura, their first league title in 70 years. I've been thinking about this and listening to that Football Picante podcast I listened to. I feel like Mexico might be winning the battle but losing the war here, in the sense that they haven't bought in. Liga MX hasn't bought into being a selling league to the degree that MLS has. So they're holding on to a lot of their players, which means their league is still stronger. They win CCL every year. They get a ego boost off that. But meanwhile, the U.S. is blowing past Mexico at the international level because their players are going to Europe and getting better, while some of Mexico's are stagnating. And you've seen some of these big moves within Mexico where Charlie Rodriguez goes from Monterrey to Cruz Azul, Sebastian Cordova goes from America to Tigres. But these are guys that you wonder, what are they still doing in Mexico? Whether Charlie Rodriguez, Sebastian Cordova, Cesar Montes, too, is still there. These are guys that, I'm sorry. I mean, I know you bristle at this notion a little bit that you have to go to Europe to get better, but these are guys that in my view, should have gone to Europe like 2 years ago and are still in Liga MX. So I don't know. If you start looking at reasons why the U.S. now has won 3 in a row and is dominating Mexico at the international level, that might be one thing to look at. But I know,
All right. So when these players that are playing in Liga MX shine in the World Cup in Qatar in November and December and actually do something not just better than what they have done in the past, but ultimately better than what the U.S. does, then what are you going to say?
Then I'll look very stupid, which would not be the first time.
I know. Well, I mean, it's just to your point, though. You know this tier system that exists in terms of work permits when it comes to EPL, and the U.S. is on the 4th tier, and La Liga tier, or Liga MX, to your point, is on the 3rd tier and stuff like. I was just talking to Yank Report, Sam Stokes over there at Yank Report. You should check him out. He's a good follow and a good show over there on YouTube. When we were talking about the discrepancy and the disconnect between the amount of players that we, as the United States, are now sending over to Europe. And the opportunities that exist relative to Liga MX. And once again, sometimes that's not fair to do that comparison, but we're going to do it. It's the same way when we're really high in the rankings for FIFA. FIFA rankings are stupid unless the U.S. is in the top 10 and has made a significant jump over there. And then we're like, oh yeah, these are really, really important. In the same way, just because we are sending more players to Europe doesn't necessarily make us on that day. I know it has in the qualifying process and over the last year, but on that big day, because still, when it comes to U.S.-Mexico, the biggest game in history that we won, 2-0, was in 2002. And there hasn't been a bigger game than that in terms of the world stage. And
last MLS story does involve a Mexican player in MLS. Alan Pulido. This is very disappointing. One of my favorite players to watch in MLS when healthy, but that just hasn't been the case often. And now it looks like he's going to miss the entire 2022 campaign for Sporting KC.
Designated player for Sporting KC. And when he was on the field, he was very, very good. This does not bode well for, obviously the next year, including national teams. So we probably won't see him in Qatar when Mexico qualifies. But it does bring up a point that you're not allowed to replace a designated player. If the whole concept of a designated player is to not just make your team better, but it's limited, as we know, with 3 designated players, not just make your team better, but in doing so, that expenditure makes the overall league better. Why wouldn't you be allowed to replace it? It doesn't make any sense. It's your money, and I don't know. I'm sure that there's somebody at the league, if anybody at the league is listening to this right now, that is screaming and yelling, saying, "You moron, it's because this." But it just seems to me that you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're the league. If SKC is determined that he is going to be out all next year and he's a designated player, it's not harming the league to give SKC the opportunity to go out and to replace that designated player position with another designated player. So I don't know. These are things that from the outside look ridiculous, but I'm sure that there are reasons why on the inside. What else you got, Mosse?
Well, then, Luis wanted to hit on AFCON in the first segment this week because Luis Aguilar.
Because we're going to give it the respect that it deserves.
Well, Luis quite taken with this tournament, but the first story he's got here is this Tunisia-Mali situation, which...
Okay. Well, when I say respect, I mean laughing hilariously at the antics that have gone on.
Yeah, so it was utterly bizarre. Mali was winning this game 1-0, and the referee must have had like a dinner reservation or something to get to because he blows for the final whistle in the 85th minute. Everybody's looking around like, what are you doing? It's and so they ended up sorting that out and restarting the game. But then he blew the final whistle again before 90. And this time, Tunisia said, the heck with it. This guy has it out for us, and we're not even dealing with this. And they walked off the field. And the African Federation ended up awarding Mali the victory, 1-0. And not only did we not get to 90, but it should have gone way past 90 because there were subs, VAR reviews, injury stoppages, hydration break. So it was completely bizarre. Now, it plays into this larger conversation about this tournament because folks on Twitter were really poking fun at this. It just shows what a mess this tournament is. And then others were pushing back and saying, wait a minute, UEFA not too long ago couldn't even stage a Champions League draw, and that was a mess. So there was this kind of whataboutism going on about, crazy stuff happens in a quote-unquote civilized world too. And so it plays in, as you mentioned, this whole larger argument about this tournament.
All right. Well, first and foremost, just so everybody's clear, nobody is saying that it was uncivilized, okay? But look, this is worthy of ridicule, okay? But it's an isolated type of moment, and it could have happened anywhere. It just so happens that it happened at AFCON. Look, the frustration and the anger and the ridicule and the criticism on a weekly basis that you see coming out of England when it comes to the EPL and the referees and VAR. So, that just proves that it happens all over the world. I am always willing to give referees the benefit of the doubt. And maybe I'm unique in that aspect of it. Mistakes can be made. Even in this situation, the first mistake, look, all right, you lose track of time, whatever. And you thought when you watched that game that, all right, they got to sort it out. They reminded him, all right, my bad. All right, you put your hand up, you say things can happen. I mean, the amount of stuff that a referee is keeping track of and trying to, in real time, after the fact, anticipate is sometimes mind-boggling that they don't make more mistakes than they do. But then to compound it by blowing it early, something must have been going on, and immediately people's minds go to, was it fixed? Was this a problem? Is it just complete ineptitude? Whatever it ends up being. It was a bad day. It was a bad day for the tournament. It was a bad day for the referee, and as we mentioned, he will not be back, and his crew will not be back for having handled it. In the same way that you bench a player for poor play, you bench a referee for what, and it's not subjective, all right? Any refereeing crew would look at that and assess it that you messed up. You made a mistake, all right? And there are ramifications when you make mistakes like that. So, yeah, and that was the story coming out of that. It's unfortunate, but that would have been the same way if that had happened in Euros or it happened in a Gold Cup or something like that. Even if there's great goals, which there were, even if there's great results, if there's great plays, that was the story because that one permeates, that one resonates.
Well, a stunning development in this tournament is that Algeria were considered the favorites. They won the last edition in 2019. We just did the Arab Cup, which they won with a B team. They have Riyad Mahrez and Benacer and Slimani and all sorts of talent. And yet they're in last place in their group in danger of crashing out of the competition. Their last match, they lost to Equatorial Guinea, which snapped a 35-match unbeaten run. Their first game against Sierra Leone, they were held to a 0-0 draw. This was the other fun story. The Sierra Leone goalkeeper, Mohamed Kamara, had an absolute blinder in that game, was named man of the match. He was crying afterwards. And listen, Luis Aguilar is more in touch with this stuff than we are, social media, what the kids like. He claims that this Kamara guy has become a viral sensation and is earning comparisons to Jorge Campos, a guy you know very well, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, you watch him, and I'm sure that there are goalkeeping coaches out there that cringe at his play. his affinity for almost playing as a sweeper and a high line at times is something to behold, but it works and he figures it out. Jorge Campos, you mentioned, it's an apt comparison because the unorthodox way in which he saves the ball, his decision-making process, which is, I mean, if you put Manuel Neuer over on one side, then you would have to put, what's his name?
Mohamed Kamara.
Mohamed Kamara on the opposite side in a group with, let's say, Jorge Campos and maybe Higuita and these types of goalkeepers. Ultimately, a goalkeeper is there to make the save. And so if you are saving the ball, people and players and coaches will put up with anything. And it's fun and it's different. And we've seen in tournaments where stars are made. Stars are made by not just the performance, but the personality behind this performance, his emotion, his passion. And then, as I said, his decision-making process and coming out and slide tackling. Sometimes he doesn't even, it's not that he doesn't recognize it. It's almost as if he disrespects and spits on the lines that exist. There are traditional lines out there. And so he says, you can't hold me back with any type of box or any type of line. You're not going to stop me from coming out. And in a very different way than Neuer, by the way, in terms of his escapades.
Yeah, one unfortunate story. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang has been sent back to Arsenal. He contracted COVID right before the start of this term. He plays for Gabon. And then he's still having health issues, some sort of heart problem. More on that when we talk about Alphonso Davies, unfortunately. Yep. And so they've now sent him home. He will play no further part in this tournament. On the field stuff, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Morocco have clinched knockout stage berth. Cameroon are playing, I believe, as we speak. Maybe Luis Aguilar can get us that score. But yeah, Abubakar has been the early star of this tournament, 4 goals in their first 2 games. So yeah, some good stuff in African Cup of Nations. We wanted to give it some love this week, and we'll keep an eye.
There we go.
All right. 1-1.
1-1.
Who are they facing? Cape Verde.
Cape Verde. 1-1. Ooh, okay. We'll get you a score before the end of the show. Anything else, Mosse?
That is it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to take a trip around Europe because there was all sorts of stuff going on over there. Don't go away. All right, we're back, and let's check out Europe, right, Mosse? Where do you want to start with this? There's all sorts of places.
Start in England and with a game that did not take place this weekend. Tottenham Arsenal, the North London derby, was canceled or postponed, much to the dismay of folks in England like Gary Neville. This is a controversy that's been building for weeks, and I feel like it kind of reached the tipping point this weekend. The issue here is that, once upon a time we thought, okay, if you have a huge COVID outbreak and you have a bunch of guys out specifically due to COVID, you can get games postponed. But what's starting to happen here is teams that have a bunch of guys out, like it was Arsenal that requested this postponement and got it. Teams that have a bunch of guys out for quote unquote normal reasons, injury, suspension, international duty, as long as there's 1 or 2 COVID cases in there, they kind of lump everything together, fuzzy it up, say, hey, we have 10 guys out. Hey, COVID, what can you do? And they're asking for postponements and getting them. And some people say, well, wait a minute, how many of these are specifically COVID? Because if that's a low number, then I'm sorry, the other stuff is part of the game. And so this one really rubbed people the wrong way because you look closer and it sounds like it's only 1 or 2 COVID cases at Arsenal, but they have, a bunch of guys at Africa Cup of Nations, which to your point last week, then don't sign African players.
Right.
Who told Granit Xhaka to get a red card in the previous game and get suspended? So you add it all up and people are unhappy. Tottenham, they put out a statement about this game being postponed and made clear they were not happy about it. They felt like it should have been played. So how do you see this whole situation and how the Premier League is handling it?
Yeah, part of me, not part of me, I definitely can understand the consternation out there. But first off, grow up. Vet people, or in this case, teams, entities, look to push the boundaries or take advantage of unique circumstances that have arisen. Should not surprise you or anybody else out there. Ultimately, you sometimes take your chances, and the court or the deciding, whoever the arbiters are, they may or may not grant you what you want, but you'll never know unless you actually take a stab, which is ultimately what they did. I didn't see, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't as if they were hiding the situation. You could very easily calculate the numbers. And so in their petition to have this game postponed, everybody would have seen what is going on, and they agreed it. If you don't want it to, if you don't want that to happen, then take it up with the court. Take it up with the the group that decided it. Having said all of that, and maybe I've just thrown my hands up to a certain extent, as a lot of people have, as we continue to just slog it out through this craziness over the last couple of years. I firmly believe that whether it's in sports or anything else, we are living in a time that requires so much more adaptability and flexibility and adjustment. And I think most of us have learned to accept, and at the very least acknowledge, that life is far less balanced. And guess what? Life is far less fair and structured than it ever has been in the past. And everything is worthy of a great big asterisk, if you really want, relative to the past. So either get on with it or don't. And now that when I say that can be applied to either side. Those that think that this was appropriate to do this, and those that think that it was inappropriate to do this. The definition or the idea of competition has even changed within the last couple of years. What is fair? What is balanced out there? Well, nothing. And so, do you want to give the public this vastly inferior product in one of your marquee games if you are the EPL? Not necessarily. I mean, from a business perspective, you're not putting forth your best foot. So, in that sense, I can understand that. But I also think there's going to be a whataboutism. And in the past, if a team had a bunch of players with the flu or whatever, you deal with it. And you bring up players and you play with whatever you have, and you figure it out. Or if a bunch of players had gotten hurt during the week in training, nobody would postpone the game or insert whatever else your beef is, or your problem with, or your challenge that you're going for. But that COVID is kind of used as a catch-all now for any of your ills that you may have. Should not surprise you, me, or anybody else out there. Does it make it right? Probably not, but I'm really not, I'm not that jacked up about this or irritated about it.
So the next chapter in this story is Arsenal have a midweek game against Liverpool, the second leg of the League Cup semifinals. We'll see if they can play that. Last week it was 0-0 first leg at Anfield. And ironically enough, that tie was postponed a week because Liverpool asked for a postponement of the first leg. And when they did that, Arsenal fans bristled at them and said, "Oh, come on, you can play." At two. Brute. And so, and the winner faces Chelsea in the final. They knocked out Tottenham, which Luis Aguilar, another note this week, is this another Spider-Man Tottenham fan thing? What is this? Zendaya is officially a Spurs fan?
Who's Zendaya? Who's Zendaya? Okay. All right. So she's a fan of Spurs.
Terrific.
Well, they got that going for them.
Yes.
That's about all they have going for them right now.
And because Luis Aguilar annoyed me by including that note in the rundown, I'm going to throw him under the bus here. Aston Villa played Manchester United this weekend, and for the second time in a few weeks, he put Ashton Villa in the rundown. He's got
dialect, Mosse.
Yes.
That's his dialect.
But yeah, so that's where we'll go next. So United had a 2-0 lead in the second half. Bruno Fernandes with both goals. The first one, an absolute howler by Emiliano Martinez. Very uncharacteristic because he's an excellent goalkeeper. Then Coutinho comes on. This was, I don't know if you watched this game, but this was slightly surreal to me. Villa's first goal to make it 2-1, in no way, shape, or form was that a Coutinho assist. Fred poked the ball away from him into the path of Ramsey, who put it in. I saw that the first go around. I certainly saw it after the replays. It was pretty clear to me. And yet the announcer in the game on NBC, his name escapes me, but he kept saying over and over again that Coutinho got an assist on that goal. And somehow he fooled everybody because I saw like 20 different articles after the game alluding to the fact that Coutinho had a goal and an assist. As we sit here today, 48 hours later, I'm still seeing people.
How dare you trample on narrative? What is your problem?
I mean, this is.
Have you no sense of decency, my friend? I mean, goodness. Never, ever let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Well, another person he hoodwinked is Luis Aguilar, because I'm just noticing Luis Aguilar here has Coutinho gets an assist and scores equalizer.
Okay, but he still made up for it.
Right,
I mean, he still should be the story.
So he was involved in the goal that made it 2-1.
Around or about
and
the ball.
then he scores the one to make it 2-2. So listen, I love Coutinho. I really hope this works out. And obviously, it's your first game. You come on second half with your team down 2-0 and it finishes 2-2 and you're involved in one goal and scores the other. I'm not denying that it's a positive start.
Yep.
But he was on the field for 25 minutes. I think people in England really want this to work out, so they made a little bit more of it than it was. I mean, did you think he did anything that impressive in the 25 minutes he was on the field to make you think, oh, the old Coutinho is back?
I mean, let's see him do it against a big team. To be honest, okay? It's all fine and well, against lowly Manchester United, but
you joke, but there was so much focus on Coutinho that there was remarkably little talked about that the Manchester United part of this game, that here they are blowing a 2-0 lead in the last 20 minutes to Aston Villa. So that team is just an absolute mess. I like the Rangnick move when it happened, but it's been a disaster so far. You're hearing all this reports of dressing room unrest, and Ronaldo's regretting going there, and him and Jorge Mendes are already plotting his next move somewhere else. So
at what point, Mosse, do we, listen, we've seen it over the course of time where huge, big clubs, super clubs have fallen off of their pedestal. And some of them have never really returned to the lofty heights. You look at, I don't know, Leeds or somebody like that, or I don't know, Nottingham Forest and these types of teams. Some of them have gone down and come back up. But at what point do I stop viewing Manchester United as a super club?
The weird thing is, usually those falls from grace are triggered by financial issues.
Right.
They can no longer spend and buy top players. United are still very relevant in the transfer market, still throwing around money, still one of the richest clubs in the world that's able to attract pretty much any player they want. So that's why it gets a little tricky there. I mean, they still feel like an underperforming big club rather than somebody that's not a big club anymore, if that makes sense.
Well, they're also, I mean, they've set themselves up for a new coach that's going to come in, right? I mean, Ralph is just kind of interim, right? So they can always fall back on, okay, it's really going to get sorted out. But Rangnick at some point has to kind of steer the ship in an appropriate and right direction.
I mean, honestly, you look at where they are on the table and the way Arsenal, Tottenham, and West Ham are playing, top four is looking like, at best, like a 50-50 proposition, which, they don't finish in the top four. It's a disaster this season.
Well, Cristiano Ronaldo has said that they have to finish in the top three, that should be their goal.
The big game in England, we probably buried the lead here a little bit, was the Manchester City-Chelsea match. 1-0 Manchester City. It's a tale of two Belgians here, because De Bruyne was sensational, scores a great goal, while Lukaku struggled. Tuchel then blasted him after the game, which is sort of interesting. Lukaku's not allowed to say anything about Tuchel, but Tuchel's allowed to throw the player under the bus, I guess, because he's the coach and Lukaku's the player, so people seem fine with that.
What a load of crap that is. I mean, come on. But to use Tuchel's words then, well, I don't take it personally or anything like that. That's what Lukaku should literally have just taken the words that he said after that whole thing and used it. But Tuchel should really be pushed to the side for at least a game. He should sit out a game to just, because to cool the fire and the heat of that type of comment.
So the gap between those teams is 13 with the equal number of games played. So Chelsea are off the case. The only question is whether Liverpool could still make a run. They are
11 points back. Right?
11 with a game in hand. In theory, they win that game. It's 8. So that's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely. I mean,
it's not happening. It's not happening. So we'll talk about that a little later. But this game, I think what this game pointed out to me was that when you look at this Manchester City team, with the way that they play and with the lack of a true number 9, and so if you will, a false 9, they can kill you 3 different ways. 1, they can pass you to death, and they are very, very good at doing that. 2, they will press you right from the goal kick, and they will win the ball in really advantageous areas. Even De Bruyne's goal, at times, you can look at the way that the press had happened and the way the ball was turned over there. And then 3, they also have found a way to absorb pressure. And I don't think it's necessarily something they always want to do, but they have absolutely no problem and are incredibly comfortable doing it, where they absorb pressure and the speed in which they are able to counter. It is this spear, this trident, if you will, that I think is, and not trident positionally, I'm talking about just the three ways that they have to beat you, that makes me ask this question, and then we'll move on to you, Mosse. Do you think that this Manchester City team, I know they haven't achieved the lofty heights of this team that I'm about to compare them with. Do you think that this is ultimately a better team than Pep's Barcelona team? In the ways in which they can beat you?
Yeah, you could argue. I don't think both teams at their best. I think that Barcelona team was more spectacular, but in the sense that this might be a more complete team, because you're right. He's added some different layers.
That Barcelona team is like 1,000 cuts, right? Ultimately, that broke it down. I just think they're more dynamic in a strange way. And again, maybe it's not right to say better or worse, but I do think that there's something about this team. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to, win Champions League. They're going to win the league here again, but that Champions League thing is looming.
I thought the whole no center forward thing would be a bugaboo over a long season like that, but to your point, this might be the best iteration of Manchester City we've seen the last few years. He's really figured out.
But I still don't think that's his ideal. Not that he ever probably reaches his ideal. It's not that he said, well, I'm going to go prove to everybody that we can be the greatest team in the world and play with a false nine. It just, this is what happened. And he said, all right, we'll get on with it and we'll figure it out. And we have such good quality that we can figure it out. It's just, it's fun to watch because I don't think that they are one-dimensional. As I mentioned, they have multiple dimensions. And so it gets me thinking about how or if those great teams of Barcelona, because we're not comparing it to Pep's Bayern Munich. I think that they're much more dynamic and multidimensional than Bayern Munich. But it is an interesting conversation. All right, let us know out there what you think.
Well, you mentioned Barcelona, so it's a natural segue to Spain. And it's interesting with these domestic Super Cups. England, we know how they are about tradition, so they're going to keep playing that Community Shield in August, right before the start of the season. Germany, to be fair, still plays their Super Cup at the start of the season, which always gives it that weird feel of, does this really count, or is this still part of the preseason? Well, these other countries like Spain and Italy have moved their domestic Super Cup mid-season, where they feel like teams are more in the flow of it, and so it's going to feel more meaningful. And Spain, to me, have hit on the best here. They've created this little 4-team mini tournament. Now, it is in Saudi Arabia, which people have an issue with, the same way they have an issue with the World Cup being in Qatar. That's a whole separate conversation that, we don't have to get into. But just in theory, having a 4-team tournament in some faraway place where you're kind of using it as an advert for your league, I think makes a lot of sense. The teams have taken it seriously. It's had a lot of juice. And again, it was excellent. Now, the final was a bit ho-hum. Real Madrid beat Athletic Bilbao 2-0, goals by Modric and Benzema. Courtois saved the penalty late, but never felt like it was really in doubt. The semifinals were terrific. Bilbao rallied to stun Atletico Madrid 2-1. And then Real Madrid-Barcelona was an instant classic. 3-2 Real Madrid in extra time. So much to get to in this game, but this is where I want to go first. A lot of talk in the Spanish media that this was a real moral victory for Barcelona. They showed they're on the right track. And then there were others who bristled at that and thought, wait, this is Barcelona. We're now giving out, So where do you come down on that? Did you come away from that game saying, boy, for all I've heard about what a mess Barcelona are, they actually look like a proper team under Xavi and have a lot of good young players, so they're going somewhere? Or no, bottom line is they lost. And
it's bottom line. I mean, that they can get up for a Copa semifinal in Saudi Arabia on neutral ground against their biggest rival, and that they are Barcelona, that should be a surprise. That's what we're handing out. Why doesn't everybody get a trophy? I mean, this is Barcelona. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't a lesser version of Barcelona, or that this isn't a work in progress under Xavi, but I'm not changing my expectations of what Barcelona should be, especially against Real Madrid. And so that they made it a game, yeah, congratulations. Because it's not as if Barcelona don't have good players. It's not as if they haven't been able to spend any money, or that they can't compete. And I know they're playing one of the great teams in Real Madrid, and like I said, their rival that is much better than them at this point. So no, I'm not patting them on the back. Good job. They're going to get a good job.
I have to say, I'm a little bit more on the side of that I came away impressed. I think they have a little something going on right now, because at the start of that game, you see Ferran Torres makes his debut. Ousmane Dembele, who I thought was excellent in this game. You've got Gavi in the midfield, who's an excellent young player. And then you start to think, boy, and you've got Ansu Fati and Pedri on the bench. You find a spot for those guys. Pedri presumably in the place of Frankie de Jong, and then Ansu Fati in place of Luke de Jong, who, by the way, can't stop scoring. Actually scored in the game against Real Madrid, but still, he would be the natural guy to make way there. And you start to plug in those pieces, and you start to think, that's actually a pretty good, fun team. Also, Memphis Depay is still in the mix.
So then they're underperforming.
I tell you, I like some of that young talent. They got to keep Fati healthy, but Fati, Pedri, Gavi, it's a nice nucleus to build around. Araujo at the back is an excellent player. You know, you've got 38-year-old Dani Alves. Okay, that doesn't fit the youth movement.
At the expense of our Americans.
Serginho Dest.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know. I came away impressed. I actually think Barcelona are going somewhere. So
I think you need to raise your level of expectation. I think that you are dumbing down Barcelona, and in doing so, you're doing a disservice to one of the great teams in the world.
To circle all the way back to the Tunisia, Mali, and how, you know, hey, crazy stuff happened there, but it happens in Europe too. The Betis Sevilla Copa del Rey match this weekend was a bit of an embarrassment for Spanish football. So it was played on a Saturday. It was 1-1. Papu Gomez scored, and Nabil Fekir equalized. And late in the first half, a Betis fan throws some sort of projectile onto the field, hits.
Don't throw shit.
Yeah,
I mean, come on.
Hits a Sevilla player, Joe Jordan. And the match has to be stopped. They take both teams off the field, and then they picked it up again on Sunday behind closed doors, and picked it up from where it was, 1-1. Betis ended up winning 2-1. Canales scored the winner in the second half. But the whole episode was, you know,
I mean, look, we saw it last night in the NFL, and it's just the brain function, or I guess it would be the lack of brain function, that makes a person look down at their bottle, drink, whatever they're holding in their hand, and say, this will be a good idea, especially in this day and age. Take out the moral part of it and just the reprehensible type of action and the violent action. But just from a practical perspective, with cameras everywhere, okay, you're going to be seen. And what makes you think that in any era it is appropriate, let alone in the era that we live, that we live right now? It just don't throw shit and don't be an ass. You do those two things, you're going to have a pretty okay life. You're going to limit yourself in terms of problems out there. I think you can use that as a T-shirt if you want.
I called him Joe Jordan, who's a former Scottish player. It's a Spanish guy, Juan Jordan. I don't know why I turned him into.
That's all right.
Americanize it. But on the Mexican front, Tecatito, who we know from these U.S.-Mexico battles, he signed with Sevilla a few days ago and made his debut this weekend. So there's another Mexican player to keep an eye on in La Liga. Anything else in Spain or?
No, that's good. That's good.
So one American player who can't stop scoring is Weston McKennie as we journey to Italy.
Yep.
He scored midweek in the Italian Super Cup. It was a heartbreaking defeat for Juventus. They lost 2-1 to Inter. Alexis Sanchez scores on the last kick of the game. Alexandru made a mess of it and led to the Sanchez goal. But McKennie scored in that game, and then he scores again over the weekend in Serie A, a 2-0 win over Udinese. Dybala also scored. Dybala's future, by the way, very up in the air, could be settled this month. But Weston McKennie, I have to say, of this nucleus of U.S. players in Europe that everybody keeps talking about, if you do like a power rankings, he's on top right now. He's flying, and he's attained the status of that club that I didn't think. When he went there, I thought he'd be a squad player, and then he won over Pirlo and became a very important player last season. But then Pirlo leaves, Allegri comes in, they brought in some other players. I thought, he's going to slip down the pecking order, going to have to prove himself all over again. Well, he has, and he's become completely indispensable. He's probably their best midfielder. And so, I mean, I think when you contrast it to, Pulisic, Reina, Dest, all these other guys, he's probably number one in those power rankings right now.
Yeah. I mean, look, and I think somebody mentioned something on me on Twitter about my comment about Weston McKennie and if he was playing in MLS. And I want to be very, very clear. I think Weston McKennie is a great player. Okay. And I think he's, as you said, proving his worth consistently on one of the great teams in the world. I think the style in which he plays, I think, benefits him with this team in that he can kind of free form and those late runs that you just love to see, because he just waits to kind of see things develop out wide, and then, like I said, he ghosts in late, and oftentimes that miss, the pickup from the defenders, they miss it because it's happening so fast and it's coming from far out. This is great. This is wonderful that he is starting, that he is a vital part of that machine right now. That from a value perspective, his value, I mean, right now on the open market, if you were to sell Weston McKennie, I mean, you're looking into the, I don't know, 90 million. I don't know what it ended up being, but that's great. That's great for him, and it bodes well, obviously, for his individual future, but also for the national team. And he's got that wonderful personality. And when I say that, not just his personality off the field, but the personality on the field, that I can do anything, and I don't care what history has said. You can't limit me, and the world is definitely his oyster right now, and it's fun to see. And it's fun to see him continue to get better and better, and to understand the rhythms and the flows of the game, and to have him be appreciated and respected as something now even more than just a good American player. And as I said, at times being looked at as a great player who just happens to be American.
At the top of the table, it's Inter 2 points up on AC Milan. I'd say Serie A feels, of all the top leagues in Europe, it feels the least super clubby to me. Now, Juventus, not too long ago, won 9 in a row. So when we were bemoaning
traditional type,
when we were bemoaning how top-heavy and predictable European football was becoming, Serie A was right there as part of the conversation. But the Juventus thing has kind of run its course. They barely finished top 4 last season. They're outside the top 4 this season. And meanwhile, you have teams at the top that aren't these like big spending monoliths, and it feels pretty wide open. I went into the season having no clue who was going to win Serie A, and we have a nice race here between Inter and AC Milan, Napoli and Atalanta hanging around too. So for what it's worth, it does feel like the least super clubby to me. One more Serie A note: Nani, who signed with Venezia, he made his debut, came on and assisted the equalizer against Empoli. It finished 1-1. Tessman started this game. Buzio came on as a sub. So lots going on with Venezia right now for us to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Nani showing up. That's interesting. I mean, they're raiding MLS here, and I guess Nani didn't want to continue on. So Venezia, as we said time and time again, they there was 1-1, right? That Venezia game that finished
correct
1-1. If they stay up, that's a success, and that players like Gianluca Busio are getting playing time at times starting and getting that type of experience and not missing a beat. It goes back to what we talked about, in that as we are creating this new generation that is being marketed and ultimately bought by the world, they are coming armed with tools that enable them maybe to adapt more quickly and better and figure it out. And at times they're coming into different situations that have existed in the past, and much more accommodating and comfortable types of situations. But still, it's not easy to just get dropped in, especially as a young, inexperienced player. Even with all those tools, it's still not easy to get dumped into a whole new country and culture and learn a new language, and then have to perform in the fishbowl that is, in this case, it would be Serie A, but whatever it is, wherever you're going.
And then we'll end our European roundup in Germany. Dortmund won emphatically on Friday. They beat Freiburg 5-1. Haaland scored 2 goals. That cut the gap to 3. Haaland, by the way, said that Dortmund are really pressuring him to make a decision on his future this month, so that could come very soon. But so they cut the gap to 3. Bayern had a tricky away game against Cologne. You started to think, hey, maybe something interesting could be brewing here. And right on cue, 4-0 Bayern. Lewandowski with a hat trick. He reaches 300 career Bundesliga goals. The only other player to do is Gerd Müller. The record, Gerd Müller, 365. So if Lewandowski were to stay with Bayern, there's been some rumblings about him leaving, but if he were to stay a couple more seasons at the clip that he's been scoring at, he would get there. So they pushed the lead back up to 6. So we'll keep an eye on that. Ricardo Pepi made his first start for Augsburg, played about 84 minutes in a 1-1 draw against Eintracht Frankfurt. But two disappointing notes when it comes to CONCACAF players. Gio Reyna has still not featured for Dortmund since that hamstring injury way back in September. And I saw an interview with Marco Rosa where he admitted he's very concerned. They keep pushing back the return date. Yeah. They're now shooting for after the international break. So we'll see. He's been out several months. It's concerning.
Let me ask you something. This sentiment that exists out there that Gio Reyna should automatically be part of the national team, that just comes from a very short period, a very small sample size, right? I mean, why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I have to see what he looks like when he comes back from this injury, but I have to say I am a big fan of his. From the sample that we did get, both with Dortmund and the U.S., I think he's a really special player that can add something. So I'm sort of on that page that if he's 100% healthy, he's a starter for sure on the U.S. Yeah, you're not all the way there.
I'm not saying that he can't be, and I don't. But I feel like we've almost carved out this spot that no matter what happens, it's there for him. And the sample size is so small, but and obviously in that moment he was very, very good, which I think drives a lot of this. But I'm trying to think if there's anybody else out there that, with such a small sample size, has been given such a benefit of the doubt. And I'm not saying that he won't live up to the hype. First off, he has to get healthy, and that could be a problem in and of itself if this is just chronic and once again he doesn't have that gene that enables him to stay healthy. I don't know. It's just interesting to me that whenever he is mentioned, it is almost written in pen that he is part of the team. Even after now, we're talking about a year that he has had problems, and the World Cup is coming fast. And so, if he ends up just making it and just being healthy after the summer, is that enough of a sample size ultimately to say, yeah, you're going to take one of those spots, especially in this day and age where we just talked about all of the different options and all of the different depth out there.
No, absolutely, yeah. And then the other unfortunate news involving a CONCACAF star, Alphonso Davies. So he had COVID recently. He recovered from that, but similar to Aubameyang I mentioned earlier, in ensuing tests they detected some sort of heart issue. It's an inflammation of a heart muscle. Nagelsmann tried to play it down like it wasn't, but boy, you hear heart and you get nervous. So he's going to be out several weeks. He'll miss Canada's 3 upcoming qualifiers, including that home game against the U.S. on January 30th. So yeah, that's not great news from a player that we love.
That's not. I mean, just from a personal perspective, competitive side of it. Listen, we want to beat Canada, but I kind of want to beat Canada with all guns blazing. I want everybody there, and just from a neutral perspective, you want to see that player. And then from a human perspective, you hope that he gets through this. And by all accounts, when you see him and the things that he's saying, he's, from a physical perspective, going to be fine. It's just a matter of time, but it couldn't come at a worse time in terms of the qualifying process right now. So we hope he's back and on the field and doing the great things that he does. But this Canada game is going to come up, or is it? I mean, who knows with the way our world is working right now? If the game ends up being played there in Hamilton, or if it's moved, who knows? We'll find out later on this month. But it's coming fast. And the U.S. has an opportunity for a Canada team that's flying, that certainly can look to replace this player, but not easily, because he is such a force going up and down that field. So get better soon, Fonzie.
That is it.
All right, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, it's time for Ask Alexi. Don't go anywhere. All right, we're back, and it's time for Ask Alexi. You send those questions in on the social media platforms, and you use that hashtag Ask Alexi, or you use our State of the Union podcast hotline, 657-549-2297. That's 657-549-2297. And I know we have an audio question, but first we're going to start it off with a Twitter question.
At T Burns 2 asks, this is kind of a cheeky question. EPL already done and it's January. When will they adopt playoffs?
Oh my goodness. This happens almost every year when something like this happens in any league, where for all intents and purposes, it is decided. And as we mentioned in the EPL right now, unless something ridiculous were to happen, Manchester City is going to cruise to yet another title. And yes, there are other things that are important, and the battle for top 4 and the battle for top 6 and the relegation battle, as we always talk about. But ultimately, for any league, even if it has promotion relegation, it's about who's champion. The way you define your champion is up to you, and the structure differs in different leagues. Obviously, from a U.S. Perspective, we know, and for the most part, we love, because it is what we are used to, a playoff type of situation. And while Europe has had playoffs, and even tournaments are playoffs, but you look at the championship and the way that they use playoffs, it's kind of a bastardized version of what playoffs are here right now. If right now I could tell you that the EPL and all of those teams now that are looking at Manchester City and saying, well, the train has left the station and it's not coming back, and we're certainly not going to catch it. If I told you, and I told all of those fans that you're going to get another bite at the apple, all right? Now, where you finish is going to be important relative to where you play those games, but you're going to get another bite of the apple. Would you take that right now? From a business perspective, absolutely you will. But the EPL doesn't need to do it. And until they need to do something like that from a business perspective, they're fine with what they are making. They're not going to ruffle feathers, because it would ruffle feathers. And who knows, maybe there would be protests out there, and you're killing the game, and you're bringing in an American concept that it doesn't to something that doesn't need it, and you're ruining what we have, and you're killing the golden goose from a business perspective. But this would only make more money, and this would only make the league that much more attractive.
Let's say it was an 8-team playoff.
Okay, what would we have here?
So right now, based on the seeds, it would be Manchester City Wolves in the 1-8 matchup.
Okay.
Liverpool Manchester United in the 2-7.
Okay, so Wolves would have to travel to Manchester City to play that game, because let's say the higher seed hosts, right, in the one-off game.
The 3-6 would be Chelsea Tottenham,
Mm-hmm.
and then the 4-5 would be West Ham Arsenal.
I mean, all of those games, do you realize the numbers that they would get globally of those playoff types of games? And again, they don't necessarily need to do it, but it would be fun. And I guarantee you that while they won't say it publicly, there are discussions, there are debates, there are those that even under their breath in places that are quiet and behind the scenes say, God, we are leaving a bunch of money on the table. And think of how this would play around the world. And, like I said, it would mean that we wouldn't be sitting in January. And from a championship, a title perspective, you wouldn't be saying, well, it's over. Your league is over, and you still have 5 months to play. That shouldn't be.
Although, just to annoy Grant Wall, I would have it be a random draw and have City end up playing Liverpool in the quarterfinals.
Ooh, interesting. Well, you have to make the regular season worthwhile. So I get it. But the fact that you want to irritate Grant Wall, that does interest me. I love you, Grant. I know you're listening.
So we're doing the audio question next?
Oh, yeah. Let's do an audio question, huh?
Hey, Alexi and Dave. It's Alejandro from Las Vegas. Just wanted to actually direct this question to Mosse. I saw this on Twitter, and I wanted to see your take on it. Who would you take, prime Neymar or prime Ronaldinho? Thanks, guys.
Oh, interesting. Thank you, Alejandro from Las Vegas. That's right up Mosse's alley. I mean, this is the type of stuff that I know he thinks about when he's laying awake at night and staring at the ceiling. These are the types of, who would you rather? So what do we got, Mosse? What do you think?
I would take Ronaldinho, despite the fact that statistically it's Neymar. He's the much more productive player. If you take his prime, which I would start from the Barcelona treble season 14-15, and then include the next two Barcelona seasons 15-16, 16-17, and then that first PSG season 17-18 until he got hurt February of 2018 against Marseille. That started the run of injuries, and he's never been the same after that. But it's about a 3.5-year period there where his numbers are just bananas. I know people hate the guy, but I mean, he was incredible. So, in terms of sheer goals and assists and all that, Ronaldinho doesn't have any stretch that equates to that. But I would take Ronaldinho. If you take his prime, which I would put at the first three Barcelona seasons, 03-04, 04-05, 05-06. 03-04, He carried them to second in the league with the help of Edgar Davids, who joined mid-season, was a very good acquisition. And then over the next 2 seasons, they added more talent. Eto'o, Deku, Xavi emerged. A teenage Lionel Messi started to burst on the scene, and they won back-to-back La Liga titles and won the Champions League in 05-06. And he was the star of that team. He was the unequivocal biggest star on the planet. And he achieved the level that during that period that I think maybe like 10 players in the history of soccer have ever reached those heights. So I think at his absolute best, Ronaldinho was a more transcendent player, a more transcendent talent.
Now they're both personalities, but how much is Neymar's character and personality and the negative aspects of it in terms of the way that he has seen, how much is that impacting and affecting your decision here?
Maybe some, and that's where I was going to go next. Probably the more fascinating question about Ronaldinho and Neymar, which is actually asked a lot in Brazil, is why is one beloved and the other hated? Because it seems like they're both kind of showboaty, flashy players, and that, you know, would perhaps rub people the wrong way, but in Ronaldinho's case, no, he was one of the most beloved players we've ever had. And when Neymar is polarizing, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and in this day and age where, you know, there's so many cameras and there's VAR and the Neymar antics are kind of instantaneously sent around the world. And, you know, that was just starting to be when, when Ronaldinho was playing. Maybe it's just... maybe it's amplified so much relative to Neymar that, if Ronaldinho, it would be interesting to see if they were both playing at the same moment in, equal and parallel types of situations, what our views would be on them. Because like you said, it's not as if Ronaldinho was a shrinking violet or anything like that. And he had plenty of antics both on and off the field as Neymar had. But I just think that he is, and I'm talking about Ronaldinho here, much more beloved. I mean, the guy can go to jail or whatever, he can do whatever, and it's just part of what he does.
Neymar's image, though, could undergo a bit of a makeover here. He's got a Netflix documentary coming out January 25th. It's called The Perfect Chaos. It's been billed as you're going to get a real look at him and what he's really like and perhaps view him differently.
Soften our view of him.
We'll see.
It's designed to do that. Have you, speaking of, we'd started the show talking about documentaries, and isn't there a Maradona one out now? That's like a docudrama. It's not really a documentary. It's acting. And
somebody reached out to me on Twitter recently and said, I can't wait to hear your review of this. I haven't watched it, so it's honestly not top of my list.
Our friend Max Bretos, I think, has been watching it because I see some of his tweets and stuff like that. I'm going to check it out.
Although I
watched the Roberto Baggio one, and it was horrible.
Yeah, I know this is sacrilege, but I'm a little Maradona'd out. Like, I consumed all the tributes, all the different... I thought the HBO was transcendently great. One of the best sports documentaries I've ever seen. So maybe I'll get around to this one, but it's not really top of my list right now.
All right. What else we got?
We'll end on, we'll harken back to some MLS history. At CR Foreign Legion asks, did you play against the South African Doctor Khumalo when he was in MLS?
Yes. Dr. Khumalo was one of the original... We didn't call them designated players back then, but one of the big stars that the then Columbus Crew had signed. If my recollection is correct, he was not an actual doctor, but that's just what they had named him. Wonderful player, wonderful skill. And talk about a character. There was times where he would sit on the ball in the middle of the game, like in the middle of his moves and stuff like that. He understood that he was a performer and that this was theater, and he was there to give the people the money's worth. Absolutely, I did.
Yeah, he was a doctor in the Dr. Dre sense.
Exactly.
But we have had a couple of, like in Brazil, this legendary player Tostão had to retire early, but then became a doctor. And then Socrates, who's this beloved player from the 70s and 80s, he was actually a doctor. So there have been some cases of a guy who was a soccer player and a doctor at the same time. But in Khumalo's case, we think, no.
I was just reading about a female professional player who, while playing, has gotten her degree. So yes, there are real doctors. He was not, but a wonderful character, a wonderful initial star. And for those that like to go back into the history of Major League Soccer and all of these wonderful and strange names that existed back there, a lot of people asking me about that. I had someone ask me, because I had put up a picture from years and years ago about how the game has changed. Even things like, I mean, there was a time, Mosse, when I would step on the field and I had rings on my finger, multiple rings on both hands. I had bracelets on both wrists. I had necklaces, multiple necklaces around. I had earrings in both ears. I had beads in my hair. I had headbands and all that kind of stuff. And you would walk on the field with all of this going on. And so, yeah, it's, as I say, we've come a long way, baby. And we certainly have. We've come a long way from jewelry and Doctor Khumalo on the field to, talking about Ricardo Pepi and what he's doing. So wonderful. Great questions. As always, thank you. Keep them coming. And a reminder, 657-549-2297 is the State of the Union podcast hotline, 657-549-2297. Or you can send us the questions on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all the different platforms out there using that hashtag Ask Alexi. And it's wonderful to hear from all of you, and we want to hear from all of you in whatever form. But, check out that hotline too, because I think we're talking about personalities and Ronaldinho and that kind of stuff. We get more of the personality of the people sometimes when they leave a message. Anything else, Mosse?
That's it.
All right, we're going to take another quick break, and we've come to the end of our show. And at the end of each and every show, I give you my one for the road, and I will do that around the corner here. Don't go anywhere. Okay, we are back, and it's time for my one for the road. This week, I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, and my group of friends were, for the most part, either kind of sports and soccer friends or music friends. When it came to my sports and soccer friends, and in particular my soccer friends, a couple of my best friends, even to this day, my best friends, were people and guys that I met playing soccer. And we showed up one day in a field, and we were on the same soccer team, and we were fast friends ever since. One of those guys is a guy by the name of Brian. I might have mentioned him before, but he is a pediatric emergency doctor on the East Coast. And I was talking to him last night about everything and what's going on in the world and everything. And it was really interesting and a wonderful compliment to the show and to you, Mosse. And he wanted me to make sure to mention how amazed he is at the amount of, and he's not the only one. I know I'm just repeating what a lot of people probably say, but he was able to pass this along, how amazed and thankful he is for all of the amount of information that you are able to retain. And this is coming from, a doctor. But more importantly, in talking about the pod here, he said, listen, this is a guy that in his capacity as a pediatric emergency doctor, he sees a lot of shit. And he sees a lot of stuff that's not great. But, if you have a problem, and if you're a parent, or if you're actually a child, you want someone like him to help you. But it means he also sees a whole lot of stuff. And unfortunately, especially over the last couple of years, he has continued to see some stuff. And, his framing of the way medicine and that world is in the year 2022 is not great. And, he lamented the fact that his chosen profession has at times come in for incredible criticism. And, people look at it at times with skepticism. And he readily admitted that some of it is fair, but internally, the way that he looks at his chosen profession has changed over the last couple of years. But what I'm getting to is that what was wonderful is that he said, we all need escape. We all need something. And he talked about this podcast and the way that, we talk about soccer, which in the greater scheme of things, we all know means nothing and certainly pales in comparison to things that he is doing on a daily basis. And how thankful he is as he drives home late at night and listens to this. And by no means is he an expert on this. And there's certainly plenty of stuff that he's probably not interested in him. But to a certain extent, it's become comfort food because it gives him an oasis. It gives him an escape from what he is going through and all of the different things that he has to deal with. And so, if we are that to him or to anybody else, that's great. That's wonderful. And it's wonderful to hear that someone like him, who isn't necessarily in the soccer world, but as my friend, he said, I'll check this out. And it has become a staple of his listening to just get away from things and to talk about something that, while we are passionate about, we all know doesn't mean anything relative to the stuff that he is dealing with. So thank you for listening, first off, Brian. And to all of the men and women out there that use this as maybe a little bit of an escape, especially when it comes to, those in the medical field that at times have been maligned and unfairly at times, and in an industry that is going through incredible upheaval and change while our world is going through incredible upheaval and change. And so you are doing incredible work under some very, very stressful and difficult situations. And we thank you, and we hope that you stay safe and sane as you're going through it. And if this podcast gives you a little bit of sanity every week, then that's a pretty cool thing to have heard. So thank you, Brian. I love you. And we will hopefully be able to give you a consistent diet of the State of the Union broadcast. Mosse, anything before we go?
No, that is it. And this concludes our shortest pod in a while.
Is it? Well, I mean, we can sit here in Babylon for a couple more hours if you want, but no, we bob and weave when it comes to the length. When we first started this, Mosse, we tried to keep it to an hour, and we were pretty good for a while there. And then, as is the case with a lot of things in the pandemic, we kind of got a little loosey-goosey.
Well, the bottom line, Alex Dowd was better at clock management than Luis Aguilar,
right?
The producer.
I know. Oh, well, we'll see if we can get it back. We let it steer us. We don't necessarily want.
Did you watch a lot of the NFL playoffs?
I did. So the explain to me the Dallas thing, because I want to make sure I understand
that's why I brought it up. On the topic of clock management, look, they can blame that official all they want. That quarterback draw was the stupidest play I've ever seen in NFL history.
Should he have gone down earlier and understood that you needed a certain amount of seconds for the referee has to touch the ball or something like that?
You shouldn't have run a quarterback draw. You probably should have gone to the end zone at that point and given yourself a couple of cracks at it. But okay, they were giving you the underneath stuff, so maybe another sideline out for 10 more yards to get closer. But the one thing you can't do is run a play that you know is going to finish in bounds, and then it's going to be this crazy scramble to try to get it clocked. And okay, maybe the referee, but we're talking about a second.
I don't understand this, Mosse. For a game that is so bathed and connected to data, and everything is stop-start, and so everything is planned out, and everything is practiced, and nothing is left to chance. I feel like every week, either players or coaches are making just dumb mistakes. And like, how is that possible? They all got these clipboards that they run around with. Everything's on the computer, and they do the replays, and they got people upstairs, and they got all this kind of stuff. And yet I'm not sure these people are very smart.
On the topic of last second spiking in clock stuff, one of the more controversial defeats in Michigan football history was at Michigan State back in 2001. We were ahead. Michigan State was driving late. They ran a play, got tackled in bounds. No way they should have had time to run another play. The clock should have run out. But the Michigan State timeskeeper, he let it sit on one for several seconds. Yeah. They got that spike. They scored in the last play. And the Big Ten changed the rule after that. Now it's like a neutral Big Ten official that's in every game managing the clock. It's not. It's just
the guy that stepped out of bounds on the punt or whatever. The guy, the punt came, and like, you don't even know the rules of your own game. I don't understand this at all. You're paid all of this money. You're the greatest league in the world. You have all of this attention. We got 10,000 cameras.
And on the topic of Michigan and the NFL, the Jim Harbaugh saga rolls on, and the Raiders lost this weekend, which is bad news for Michigan fans because that's the likeliest Harbaugh destination. We wanted them to keep going so they'd be compelled to keep their current coach. So keep an eye on that story.
Harbaugh's gone. All right, listen, we've milked this for as much as it possibly can be milked. If you're still even listening right now, thank you for making it to the end of the podcast. We will talk to you again next week here on the State of the Union podcast. Please download, review, subscribe, do all the different things out there. Rate, do all those things, add comments, and we will talk to you again next week. Same time, same place. And until then, and as always, size the day.
You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops every week. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.